Returning Home, an Old Testament Christmas Story. A devotional commentary on the Book of Ruth by Dr. Ron Sheveland. Copyright 2013 by Ron Sheveland. This audiobook is read primarily by the author. Episode 1. The Bitter Return.
Before proceeding, please read Ruth, chapter 1.
When we think of the little town of Bethlehem, it is natural to focus on the Lord Jesus. But the Old Testament gives another story about the town. The book of Ruth. These two accounts are so intimately connected. It's fair to think of Ruth as the prequel to the Christmas story. In the sweep of redemptive history, the book of Ruth paves the way for the coming Christ child and contains a number of picturesque types of the future Redeemer. The parallels between the two Bethlehem accounts are astounding. And besides that, Ruth is a really good read. Many have described the book as one of the best stories ever told. When Benjamin Franklin was the ambassador to France, he occasionally attended the Infidels Club, a group that spent most of its time searching for and reading literary masterpieces. On one occasion, Franklin read the book of Ruth to the club, but changed the names in it so that it wouldn't be recognized as a book of the Bible. When he finished, the listeners were unanimous in their praise. They said it was one of the best short stories they had ever heard and demanded that he tell them where he had run across such a remarkable work of art. The old rascal delighted in telling them it came from the Bible. The chronicle contains suspense, love, and deep emotions. It begins with famine and funerals, draws us into the tension of the crises, and then provides a joyous conclusion. Did I say conclusion? That isn't really accurate. The final chapter reveals there is more to come, and indeed there was. The real end to the Bethlehem story is contained in the Gospels with a babe in a manger. In the same way that the book of Ruth prepared the way for the coming Christmas story, it can also prepare you for the coming Christmas season. It could be that you're not emotionally or spiritually ready for Christmas this year. Your inner wounds may make it difficult for you to visualize having the vaunted Merry Christmas. To whatever extent that might be the case, you'll really want to enter into this captivating narrative. To fully engage in this book, you'll want to read the Ruth text at the beginning of each chapter. It was curiosity that nudged the dozing town awake. From the gray ridge on which Bethlehem sat, two figures could be seen far in the distance plodding their way toward the town. As they came closer, it was determined that they were women, which only heightened the puzzle. Why would two women take a journey, and why would they come to Bethlehem? Finally, the pair worked their way into the village, and the speculation was lowered to whispers. Something about one of the women drew special attention. Something familiar, maybe? Finally, the puzzle was solved. With astonishment, a voice cried out, "Could this possibly be Naomi?" Someone else quickly responded in a strong affirmative. "It is Naomi. Naomi's returned. It's Naomi." The good news raced joyously through the city. Naomi was one who had always lived up to her name, which meant pleasant. Over 10 years before, this popular person had left the city, but now she was back. It's pleasant, the word went out. Pleasant has returned. It wasn't long before a group of women had gathered around Naomi, all shouting, laughing, and joyfully echoing her name. Pleasant, Pleasant, Pleasant is back. Then the celebration was brought to a halt. With one quick, sharp retort, Naomi silenced the crowd. "Stop it," she cried. "Don't call me pleasant. I'm not pleasant. I'm bitter. I am bitter because God has brought me great bitterness into my life. I went away from this place full. God has brought me back empty. The Lord has afflicted me. The Lord has brought misfortune upon me." And the people fidgeted in awkward, silent shock.
It can be devastating to lose the people and things that matter to you most.
There are different types of losses. The loss of a job, one's health, a dream, a relationship, a loved one. They may vary in their nature and severity, but all of them can be painful. Sometimes there are losses that go deeper than we could ever imagine they could possibly go. We see other people go through them and we give them our words of consolation. But when we arrive at that point, we're totally persuaded in our mind that this loss is much deeper than anyone could ever imagine. No one understands how we feel. The first chapter of Ruth is a narrative of loss. The Naomi who came back to Bethlehem was a woman in incredible pain. Someone who felt like she had been totally emptied of everything in life that really mattered to her. As we work our way through the chapter, we unearth loss after loss after loss, and we wonder why one woman would have such pain thrust upon her. The opening verses begin with the loss of her home. It says, "In the days when the judges ruled." That was a 400-year period of ups and downs when anarchy reigned. It goes on to say there was a famine in the land. The man from Bethlehem and Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. Try to imagine Naomi's heart when her husband Elimelech came to her and said, "Honey, we're going to have to leave." There is great difficulty in understanding what people go through when they move. I suppose that's because it varies for each of us. Some of us are comfortable with transitions, and moving doesn't seem very traumatic. In contrast, some of you have only moved across town and yet have declared, "I'm never going to move again." Moves are toughest when they force people to leave a culture in which they feel comfortable and transfer to a foreign setting where they don't fit in. They lose their friends, support system, and even their sense of security. There's a feeling of being dislodged from safe moorings and set afloat in a sea of gray waves. The people around you simply can't understand because they are at home. Some of you have experienced this and know a little of what Naomi was going through, but take your experience and increase it tenfold. Here was a woman who was part of the children of God, the people of Israel. Their faith and family roots were so deep that an uprooting move to another country had to be devastating. Naomi didn't simply move from one location to another location or from one culture to another culture. She left her people to go to Moab, a land that God had cursed. The Moabites were a people that had disobeyed God and lived with the consequences of his disfavor. Naomi understood that Elimelech had made the move for the welfare of their family, but she had kept repeating to herself, "It will only be for a while. Only for a while. I can make it for a while." And as the pain of the move stung deeper and deeper, she continued saying, "But it will only be for a while." Then she experienced an even worse loss. Elimelech, the man she loved, her soulmate, the one she was dependent upon, her anchor in the heathen environment, was struck down. He was dead. She was left. I've never experienced anything so severe. The closest I've come to it was losing my parents, and all the pain of that loss continues to make my heart wince when I think of it. I still don't think it compares to the loss of a mate in his or her prime. I'm not qualified to try to describe it. Some of you have lost a husband or a wife, and you're more qualified, but you still struggle with putting your feelings into words, don't you? The pain of grief is so great, it's hard to articulate. And even as your words stumble forth, there is no way that you can express the real scars that exist on the inside. There is no describing it. C.S. Lewis was a confirmed bachelor for years, until 1956 when he married a poet from America. 4 years later, she suddenly died of cancer. His pain was so intense that his self-imposed therapy was wandering around the empty house, grabbing notebooks, scribbling here and there, and keeping a haphazard journal of his feelings. This surfaced in his book, A Grief Observed. At first he was so ashamed of it, he didn't even publish it under his own name. He used a pseudonym. This book really isn't much when it comes to theology, but it does reveal the genuine feelings of a man in pain. The pages consist of a running dialogue of his hurt. Here are some quotations from it. No one ever told me that grief felt so like fear. I'm not afraid, but the sensation is like being afraid. The same fluttering in the stomach, the same restlessness, the yawning. I keep on swallowing. At other times, it feels like being mildly drunk or concussed. There is a sort of invisible blanket between the world and me. I find it hard to take in what anyone says, or perhaps hard to want to take it in. It is so uninteresting, yet I want the others to be about me. I dread the moments when the house is empty. If only they would talk to one another and not to me. On the rebound, one passes into tears and pathos. I almost prefer the moments of agony. They are at least clean and honest, but the bath of self-pity, the wallow, the loathsome, sticky, sweet pleasure indulging in it, that disgusts me. No one ever told me about the laziness of grief. Except my job, where the machine seems to run on much as usual, I loathe the slightest effort, even shaving. What does it matter now, whether my cheek is rough or smooth? They say an unhappy man wants distractions, something to take him out of himself, only as a dog-tired man wants an extra blanket on a cold night. He'd rather lie there shivering rather than get up and find one. It's easy to see why the lonely become untidy, finally dirty and disgusting. And on he writes, page after page of pain. It's not the type of book to pick up for light reading, but some of you, due to a common history, will relate to it. You've been there. That's where Naomi was. How did she cope? She wrapped herself around her two boys, Mahlon and Killian, and held them close. They were now the two foundation pillars on which she could rest. They found wives, Orpah and Ruth, from among the people. For the next 10 years, Naomi hoped for a grandchild, one of the great hopes of any mother, but especially a Jewish mother who sincerely hoped that the Messiah would come through her lineage. But she waited and waited and waited, and then her sons died. We don't know how. The text doesn't tell us. Perhaps a disease snatched both? Their names literally mean sickness and used up. We can only speculate, but the outcome is clear. Suddenly, Naomi's boys were taken from her. Mahlon and Killian, gone. Death, loss, emptiness. She'd lost her home, then her husband, and now she'd lost her family.
Life's losses are often accompanied and amplified by inner spiritual losses.
Now Naomi is in a cold, frightening survival phase. There is no welfare system for her, no widow's pension. She's at the mercy of a predatory society. If she doesn't find a benefactor or a source of income, she will starve. She heard that back in Bethlehem God had blessed the people and the famine was over. Bethlehem meant the town of bread, and she needed some. So she slowly set out with her 2 daughters-in-law to make their way on the long, lonesome journey. But as the trip began, Naomi realized there's no sense in these daughters coming along. And now, as much as it hurt, she forced herself to turn to them and tell them to go home. Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show kindness to you as you have shown to your dad and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband. In this combination of prayer and plea, Naomi reveals a core of love and spirituality. But don't assume too much. The next paragraph shows that her inner life has been deeply shaken. Tears and weeping, the kind that shake the body and sap the soul, overwhelmed the 3 women. They huddled together for emotional warmth, and the daughters begged to continue with Naomi. But then she pushed them back, and in her impassioned response, we discover she hadn't only lost her home, family, and livelihood, but also the inner spiritual qualities of faith, hope, and joy.
A loss of faith.
In her emotional entanglement with all that was going on, she finally admits the deepest secret of her heart, her loss of faith. Oh, not a total loss of faith in God, but a reduction of confidence in who God is and what he wants to do in her life. In verse 13, she screams out, "It is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has gone out against me." Then in verse 21, while speaking to the residents of Bethlehem, she complains, "I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me." Some may find her words shocking. And yet, if we are honest, we will admit that in the midst of loss, there is usually a dark, secret question. If God is so loving and powerful, why would he allow tragedy like this to come into my life? We may cover it up with pious little platitudes that suppress the inner feeling, yet it's often there. A Christianity Today poll asked, "Have you ever felt abandoned by God?" 72% of respondents answered yes. Of those, 44% said yes, but I relied on God's word. And 28% said yes, and I was devastated. C.S. Lewis would have fallen into that second category. He wrote this, "Meanwhile, where is God?" This is one of the most disquieting symptoms. When you're happy, so happy that you have no sense of needing him, so happy that you're tempted to feel his claims upon you as an interruption. If you remember yourself and turn to him with gratitude and praise, you will be, or so it feels, welcomed with open arms. But go to him when your need is desperate, when all other help is vain, and what do you find? Now let me break in and just remind you. He's describing his feelings. He's not trying to give doctrine here. What do you find? A door slammed in your face. A sound of bolting and double bolting on the inside. After that, silence. You may as well turn away. The longer you wait, the more empathetic the silence will become. There are no lights in the windows. It may be an empty house. Was it ever inhabited? It seemed so once. And that seemingly was as strong as this. What can this mean? Why is he so present, a commander in our time of prosperity, and so very absent to help in our time of trouble? Not that I am, I think, in much danger of ceasing to believe in God. The real danger is of coming to believe such dreadful things about him. The conclusion I dread is not, so there's no God after all. But, so this is what God's really like. Deceive yourself no longer.
A loss of hope.
Besides losing faith, there is also a loss of hope. That's one of the hardest things about grief. It's not just the sense of a loss of what you have, but it's also a loss of everything that can come. It's the feeling that everything has become so dark that there's absolutely no light at the end of the tunnel. All of the future looks bleak before you. There is no feeling that you can go to bed and wake up in the morning and expect life to be sunny. All that Naomi had treasured was gone, and with them went her future, and the future of her lineage. For Jewish women, this was tragic. They all hoped that the coming Messiah might come through them. Everything before her stretched out deep, dark, lonely, and despairing. So as a result, she takes her daughters-in-law and says to them, "Return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I'm too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was still hope for me. Even if I had a husband tonight and then gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters." In his commentary on Ruth, David Jackman reveals something about this conversation that most of us would miss because of our lack of understanding of Jewish customs in that day. He says that this is a reference to the practice of levirate marriage, which is actually to feature in a very central role later in the book. If a man died without children, his brother had to marry the widow to continue the family line. The firstborn son of such a marriage would then be considered the dead brother's child and heir. Naomi dismisses this as totally out of the question, both because of her age and the time Ruth and Orpah would have to wait for such hypothetical sons to reach marriageable age. Naomi's despair is spilled out on her daughters-in-law. There is absolutely no hope in life for me. And if you stick with me, life will be hopeless for you as well. I can have no more husbands, and I can have no more children. There's nothing left for me, and there will be nothing left for you. I love you, but go home.
A loss of joy.
Along with the loss of faith and hope, there is also a loss of joy. It's more bitter for me than for you, Naomi tells Ruth and Orpah, because the Lord's hand has gone out against me. And when she arrived back in the city where the people were trying to surround her with happiness and bring back the smiles that they remembered her so well for, she said, "Don't call me pleasant," which is what Naomi means. "Call me Mara. Call me bitterness, because the Almighty, not circumstances, God, the controller, He's brought bitterness into my very life. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Don't call me pleasant. The Lord's afflicted me. He's the one that's brought all this misfortune upon me." Naomi was a transparent woman who refused to play act or pretend she was fine. She felt like she was empty because God had turned on her, flipped her life upside down, and dropped out everything of value. On the outside, her home and family were but memories. On the inside, she had lost faith, hope, and joy. And that's the way chapter 1 ends. Don't you wish there was a happier ending? Don't you wish there was a quicker ending? The problem is that there seldom is a quick solution. Those of you who've gone through great pain know the agony of having to go on and on and on. You grab hold of helpful verses that provide temporary help, but the next day the despair may be back. And after a year goes by, people think that by now you should be healed, and they hint that it's time to discard self-pity. And yet a birthday comes up of a lost one, and the pain is all back. The memory pops back into your head, and suddenly tears are coming down your face. But all is not lost. Remember that God is still there, always there. Even when God feels absent, He remains present through the help He provides. Where is God? You may not realize it, Naomi, but He is there. You may have lost your home, family, hope, faith, and love, that you haven't lost your God. And in spite of your words of bitterness against him, he understands. He understands your feelings, and he sympathizes with you more than you could ever imagine. God is there. Chapter 1 begins with a famine in the land. It ends with the words that the harvest was beginning. And God's harvest was beginning in Naomi's life. She had gone through famine and incredible emptiness, but unbeknownst to her, God had already begun a replenishing process in her life. He started simply, slowly, and gently by giving her one person who would be her friend. And that's what the name Ruth means. And Ruth displayed her love through one significant holy act, clinging. The text says, "At this they wept again. Then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. 'Look,' said Naomi, 'your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her.' But Ruth replied with words so precious that they are often used in marriage ceremonies today. 'Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if anything but death separates you and me.'" And when Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. God may work differently in your life, but there is this constant that you can count on. God is the friend who always clings to you, and there is nothing you can do or say to him that will shatter the loyalty he has in his heart for you. He will always be there. When your eyes are filled with tears and all is dark, you may not see him, but he's watching you and watching out for you. God will not be absent from your life. Listen to his promise in Joshua 1:5 and Hebrews 13:5. "I will never leave you nor forsake you." In Naomi's case, the Lord reached down and supported her through Ruth. Interestingly enough, this selfless friend had just gone through her own loss. Fellow sufferers are often the greatest helpers, and helping is often the best way to help yourself. God gave Naomi a loyal friend because God is a loyal friend. Through Ruth, God walked by Naomi's side all the way back to Bethlehem. This text tells us that the harvest was just beginning. This would not just be true of the grain in the fields, but also the blessings that would blossom in Naomi's heart. She had accomplished her return to her birthplace, but a return to faith, hope, and joy was just beginning. Perhaps you need to begin a journey toward healing and vitality, but you don't feel strong enough to make the trip. That's okay. To return from the devastation of deep loss, just head in the right direction, and God will walk by your side and provide the help you need. Embedded in that statement are two practical suggestions, one of which is an action to do and the other is conviction to grasp. The action? Walk toward God and his blessings. Verse 6 says that when she heard the Lord had blessed his people with a harvest of good crops, Naomi decided to return to her homeland. The conviction? Realize that even when God feels absent, he remains present through the help he provides.
Even when God feels absent, he remains present through the help he provides.